What if everyone doubted your intelligence, even when you knew you were capable of so much more? Maya had always felt like an outsider in the world of intelligence, not because she lacked brainpower but because her brilliance didn't fit the conventional mold. The room was buzzing with anticipation as the IQ challenge at the Silicon Valley Tech Conference began. Bright minds from all over the country gathered, boasting about their credentials, their degrees, their flawless test scores. Maya stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding. She had never been one to boast, but today was her chance to prove that IQ numbers didn't tell the whole story. When her turn came, the judges asked her a series of rapid-fire questions, a gauntlet designed to highlight raw intellect. She answered thoughtfully but not fast enough. The crowd snickered when her score came up, among the lowest. Whispers spread like wildfire. How did she get here? That score can't be real. She felt the heat of embarrassment burning her cheeks as the laughter grew louder. Yet, beneath the humiliation, something inside her refused to break. This wasn't the end. What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? Maya's journey began not with triumph but with doubt cast by everyone around her. But what if one unexpected figure saw past the numbers and believed in her potential? The story you're about to hear is about resilience, about fighting stereotypes, and about how one woman changed the narrative with the help of someone few expected. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maya's mind drifted back to her childhood in Cedar Grove, a sleepy town in the Midwest where everyone knew your business before you did. She was a quiet girl, often misunderstood by teachers who judged her slower than her classmates because she didn't answer questions quickly enough. Her mother, a hardworking nurse, always told her that intelligence wasn't about speed but about seeing the world differently. Maya's older brother, Jason, was the star student, winning awards and praise. He was the pride of the family, and Maya sometimes felt invisible in his shadow. School was a battleground where she fought silently against labels like slow or not smart enough. One memory haunted her, the fourth-grade spelling bee when she misspelled a word and the entire class laughed, sealing her reputation as the dumb kid. But Maya learned to turn to her best friend Sarah, whose unwavering belief in her helped build the foundation of her self-worth. Sarah's words echoed in her mind now, fueling her courage to stand on the stage despite the laughter. Years passed, and Maya's passion for technology grew. She wasn't interested in memorizing facts or rushing through tests, she wanted to build, create, innovate. Her vision was clear: develop technology that could help others like her, those who didn't fit traditional definitions of intelligence but had gifts to share. When she tried to pitch her ideas to investors, she was met with skepticism. "You don't have the right credentials," they said. "Your ideas sound impractical." Worse, a mentor she trusted copied parts of her concept and presented it as his own. Maya's world felt like it was crumbling, but Sarah's voice never wavered: "You've got this. Keep going." With dwindling funds, Maya built her prototype in her tiny apartment, surrounded by discarded parts and half-finished notes. The city's noise faded as she focused, fueled by a mixture of desperation and hope. Her brother's voice haunted her: "Why can't you just play it safe?" But she refused to give up. When a local nonprofit awarded her a small grant, it felt like the first glimmer of validation in a long, dark tunnel. She entered the national tech competition with dreams bigger than ever, determined to make the world see her worth. The competition hall was a sensory overload: buzzing screens, fluorescent lights, murmurs of the crowd, and the scent of fresh coffee mingling with tension. Maya's hands trembled as she prepared to demo her project. Then, disaster struck: the prototype crashed, freezing mid-presentation. The room's energy shifted from curiosity to disbelief. She felt the sting of failure but also a strange calm. From the crowd emerged a figure who would change everything: Elon Musk, the visionary entrepreneur known for pushing boundaries and defying norms. Elon's gaze was sharp, but there was something else there: recognition. Despite the malfunction, he approached Maya, intrigued not just by her invention but by her spirit. "Let's talk," he said. Maya's world tilted. Working with Elon brought pressure unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Expectations soared, and every setback felt magnified. But Elon shared stories of his own struggles, times when he was misunderstood and underestimated. Those stories became a lifeline. Under his mentorship, Maya's project flourished. When her work finally went public, critics resurfaced, attacking her intelligence and credentials. Social media was relentless. Maya considered walking away. Then Elon stood beside her, publicly defending her, a powerful reminder that intelligence wasn't a number but a mosaic of creativity, resilience, and vision. Maya's journey taught her that true strength came from embracing one's unique mind, not conforming to narrow definitions. She rebuilt relationships, gained public recognition, and changed countless lives through her technology. Life is full of surprises, but belief in yourself will always lead the way. Maya's story didn't start in the bustling world of tech conferences and Silicon Valley hype. It began in a small town called Cedar Grove, where everyone's lives were woven tightly together like the threads of an old quilt. Growing up, Maya always felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture others expected. Her mother, Karen, was a nurse who worked double shifts to keep the family afloat after Maya's father left when she was just 6 years old. Karen's love was fierce and steady, but the stress of raising 2 kids on her own sometimes made their home feel like a pressure cooker. Maya's older brother, Jason, was the golden child, academically gifted, charming, and beloved by teachers and neighbors alike. Jason's success made his achievements the family's pride, often leaving Maya in the shadows. From early on, Maya struggled with school, not because she wasn't smart but because the traditional ways of measuring intelligence didn't capture her true abilities. She was a deep thinker, a dreamer who questioned everything, often distracted by ideas no test could quantify. Teachers would tell her to pay attention or try harder, but no one seemed to understand that Maya's mind was always wandering in a different direction, inventing, imagining, solving problems in unconventional ways. One memory that never left her was a humiliating moment in 4th grade. The teacher asked the class a question about fractions, something simple for most kids. Maya's answer was different, not wrong, but not the expected answer. The teacher snapped at her in front of everyone, saying, "That's not how you do it," and the classmates burst into laughter. It was the moment she realized being different meant being isolated. Yet her mother's voice was a soft, steady anchor in those stormy times. "Maya, intelligence isn't just about what they test in school," Karen would say, brushing Maya's hair back from her forehead. "It's about seeing the world in your own way. Never forget that." Maya's friendship with Sarah became her safe harbor. Sarah was the kind of friend who saw through Maya's quiet struggles and cheered her on when others doubted her. They would spend hours after school tinkering with old electronics, taking apart broken radios and computers, trying to understand how they worked. It was in those moments that Maya's mind shone brightest, piecing together parts, figuring out circuits, dreaming of inventions that could make life better. But at home, tension simmered. Jason couldn't understand why Maya didn't just get school like he did. "You're smart, Maya, but you don't apply yourself," he would say, frustration creeping into his voice. Maya wanted to explain that her way of thinking wasn't a lack of smarts, but he couldn't hear her. The divide grew, leaving her feeling more alone. Despite everything, Maya never lost sight of her dreams. She wanted to create technology that could help people like herself, those who struggled to fit into traditional molds but had incredible potential. She believed that intelligence was more than a number or a grade. It was creativity, empathy, problem-solving, and perseverance. High school was a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. Maya was often misunderstood by teachers and peers alike. Standardized tests were torture, and she dreaded the judgment that came with the scores. But outside the classroom, she found solace in computer clubs and after-school programs where her talents were recognized and nurtured. One of her proudest moments was winning a regional science fair with a project that used simple sensors to help people with visual impairments navigate more safely. That achievement gave her a glimpse of what was possible, but it also highlighted how far she had to go to be accepted in the tech world. College was no easier. Maya attended a state university where she was one of the few women studying computer science. The pressure to perform was intense. She worked harder than anyone, often late into the night, struggling with imposter syndrome, the fear that she didn't belong. But each challenge was a step forward. When she graduated, Maya's hopes were high, but reality hit hard. The tech industry valued pedigree, degrees from elite schools, perfect test scores, and a polished resume. Maya's unconventional background and lower standardized test results made her invisible to many recruiters. She took on odd jobs, freelancing, and small gigs just to stay afloat. Still, her passion burned brightly. She spent every spare moment developing her idea for assistive technology. A system that could adapt to different learning styles and cognitive abilities. She believed it could revolutionize education and accessibility. When Maya finally secured a meeting with a well-known Silicon Valley investor, her heart soared. But the meeting quickly turned sour. The investor's questions focused on her IQ scores and credentials. "How can you compete with established teams when your numbers don't stack up?" he asked, his tone dismissive. Maya tried to explain her vision, but it felt like talking to a brick wall. The rejection stung more deeply than she expected. To make matters worse, a mentor she had confided in betrayed her, presenting parts of her idea as his own at another meeting. The betrayal crushed her trust and left her questioning whether the dream was worth the pain. Financial pressure mounted. Maya's savings dwindled, and loneliness crept in. But Sarah never left her side. "You're not defined by their opinions," Sarah reminded her over countless coffee shop sessions. "We'll find a way." In the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by circuit boards, wires, and discarded blueprints, Maya poured her heart and soul into building a working prototype. Nights blurred into mornings, and failure was a constant companion. But each setback taught her something new. The small grant from the local nonprofit was a beacon of hope. It wasn't much, but it meant someone believed in her. Encouraged, she applied to a national tech competition, determined to show the world what she could do. As she packed her bags for the competition, Maya felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was more than just a contest, it was a chance to rewrite her story. The journey from Cedar Grove to the sprawling, high-tech venue was a whirlwind of new sights and sounds. The competition hall was packed with innovators, entrepreneurs, and dreamers, some confident, some nervous, all chasing breakthroughs. Maya's hands trembled as she set up her station. When it was time for her presentation, everything that could go wrong did. The prototype froze, screens went blank, and seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. The murmurs and whispers turned into outright laughter from a few corners of the room. Maya felt her heart sink but refused to give up. Among the crowd was a man whose reputation preceded him, Elon Musk. He watched intently, not just at the tech but at Maya's reaction. After the chaos, Elon approached her quietly and said, "I see your passion. Let's talk." That moment changed everything. Working alongside Elon was like entering a new world, faster, more demanding, but filled with possibility. Maya learned to channel her fears into determination. Elon shared his own stories of being misunderstood, reminding her that even the brightest minds often face doubt. Under his guidance, Maya's prototype evolved into a powerful tool with real-world impact. When the world finally took notice, Maya found herself at the center of both praise and criticism. Online attacks questioned her credentials, but with Elon's vocal support and her unwavering belief in her vision, she stood tall. She redefined what intelligence meant, not a test score but the courage to innovate, the heart to persevere, and the mind to dream beyond boundaries. Maya's journey from the quiet girl in Cedar Grove to a tech innovator showed that the path to success isn't always straight or easy. It's filled with challenges that test not just skill but spirit. And through it all, one thing remained clear: belief in oneself is the most powerful fuel of all. Maya thought the hardest part was behind her after getting a foot in the door of the tech world, but the real struggle was just beginning. The industry was ruthless, driven by numbers, credentials, and polished presentations, things Maya had always struggled with. At every turn, she encountered skepticism and outright dismissal. Her innovative ideas were often met with polite nods masking disbelief, as if her lower standardized test scores defined the limits of her intellect. She pitched her assistive technology concept to venture capitalists, hoping to secure the funding needed to turn her prototype into a product that could change lives. Instead, she was met with cold business jargon: "Show me the data. Where's your team? Who else is backing this?" The constant barrage of questions that revolved around credentials made her feel as if she was invisible unless she fit the standard mold. The worst blow came from someone she had once trusted, a mentor named Greg, a charismatic man who had promised to help her navigate the maze of Silicon Valley. She shared her ideas with him in confidence, hoping to gain advice and connections. Instead, Greg presented a version of her concept at a pitch meeting without crediting her. The betrayal was devastating. Maya felt the walls closing in, her trust shattered, and her confidence shaken. She confronted Greg, but he shrugged it off, telling her, "In this business, you have to be tough. If you don't protect your ideas, someone else will." Maya's world felt smaller, more hostile. Friends tried to comfort her, but she buried herself in work, determined to prove herself. The nights in her cramped apartment became longer, filled with the glow of computer screens and the hum of soldering irons. She fixed bugs, rewrote code, and redesigned circuits, learning to be resourceful with limited funds. Despite setbacks, a flicker of hope remained. Sarah was her lifeline, the voice that pulled her back when despair threatened to consume her. "You're more than their numbers, Maya," Sarah reminded her one evening, handing over a cup of coffee. "You have something they don't: heart and vision." The strain extended beyond the professional world. At home, tensions rose. Jason, once distant, became more vocal about his skepticism. "Maybe it's time to face reality," he said during a rare phone call. "Not everyone gets to be a tech genius. Maybe you should focus on something more practical." Maya's jaw tightened, anger and sadness mingling. She wanted to explain that her path was different, but words failed her. The distance between them grew, a painful reminder that family wasn't always a source of support. Even her mother's gentle encouragement felt strained under the weight of financial struggles. Community members whispered about her crazy ideas, calling her reckless and naive. Maya faced rejection letters from incubators and accelerators, each one a dagger to her already fragile spirit. Yet, amidst the darkness, there were small victories. Maya's local nonprofit grant was renewed, and a few early adopters of her prototype offered positive feedback, validating her belief that her technology could make a difference. The roller coaster of emotions continued, moments of despair followed by sparks of hope. The climax pattern of her journey became painfully familiar. Just as Maya thought she was hitting rock bottom, a phone call changed everything. The national tech competition was opening registration again, and Maya's name had been recommended by a past judge who saw potential in her work. She hesitated, fearing another public failure, but Sarah's encouragement pushed her forward. Preparing for the competition demanded every ounce of energy Maya had. She revamped her prototype, improved the interface, and rehearsed her pitch until the words felt natural. The competition was a chance to rewrite the story, to prove that intelligence wasn't about numbers but innovation and impact. When the day arrived, the atmosphere was electric, innovators and entrepreneurs buzzing with excitement, nerves, and ambition. Maya set up her station with trembling hands, aware that all eyes would soon be on her. Her presentation started strong, her passion shining through as she demonstrated the unique features of her device. But then, disaster struck. A sudden software glitch caused the system to freeze mid-demo. The screen went black, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. For a moment, Maya stood frozen, feeling the sting of humiliation rise like fire in her cheeks. Some attendees whispered doubts, others smirked. The cruel echo of past failures threatened to drown her. But then something unexpected happened. Elon Musk, a guest judge known for his unconventional approach to technology and innovation, leaned forward with interest. Rather than dismissing her, he saw beyond the glitch to the brilliance beneath. After the event, Elon approached Maya quietly and said, "Your passion is real. Let's talk." This moment marked a turning point. Working with Elon was both exhilarating and terrifying. The pace was relentless, the standards impossibly high. Maya faced new challenges, adapting to a world where innovation was expected at the speed of light, where failure was not an option. Yet, Elon's stories of being misunderstood resonated deeply. He shared how early in his career, he too faced doubt and ridicule. His belief in pushing boundaries, even when others laughed, inspired Maya to push harder. Together, they refined her prototype, integrating advanced AI features and user-friendly design. The project gained momentum, attracting media attention and early investors. But public recognition came with a new set of challenges. Maya found herself the target of harsh critics who questioned her intellect, her background, and her right to succeed. Social media buzzed with both praise and attacks. The online trolls were relentless, dredging up her past failures and low test scores as ammunition. At times, the negativity felt overwhelming. Maya contemplated retreating into the shadows, to protect herself from the harsh glare of public scrutiny. But Elon's support never wavered. He publicly defended her, stating in interviews that intelligence could not be boiled down to a single number and that Maya's creativity and determination were what the tech world needed. His words gave Maya renewed strength. She began speaking openly about her journey, advocating for a broader understanding of intelligence, one that embraced diversity of thought and experience. Maya's story struck a chord with many who felt marginalized or misunderstood. She became a symbol of resilience and innovation. Through every trial, Maya learned to embrace her unique mind and reject society's narrow definitions of intelligence. The journey was not linear, it was a winding path filled with setbacks, breakthroughs, pain, and joy. But through it all, one truth remained clear: success is not about fitting in but about daring to stand out. Maya's evolving technology began to make a real difference in classrooms and homes, helping people with diverse learning needs unlock their potential. The world started to see that intelligence was a mosaic, made up of creativity, empathy, persistence, and courage. Maya's fight was far from over, but with each step, she moved closer to the future she envisioned. The laughter that once defined her was replaced by applause, not just for her inventions but for her spirit. What pushed Maya forward was not just ambition but a deep belief that everyone deserved a chance to be seen and heard on their own terms. And that belief, above all, made her unstoppable. Maya's world shifted dramatically after Elon Musk stepped into her life, but the real adventure was only beginning. The collaboration was intense, pushing her to new limits she hadn't imagined. Working side by side with one of the most innovative minds on the planet was thrilling yet terrifying. Every day brought unexpected challenges that tested her technical skills, creativity, and resilience. The small apartment where she had once worked late into the night was replaced by a state-of-the-art workspace filled with buzzing servers, glowing monitors, and whiteboards scrawled with equations and designs. The air was thick with the hum of innovation. Maya was no longer just a hopeful inventor, she was a pioneer navigating uncharted territory. Elon's belief in her abilities was unwavering. He challenged her to think bigger, to question every assumption, and to imagine the impossible. Innovation comes from breaking the rules, he told her one morning as they brainstormed. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. Maya absorbed his words like a sponge, pushing herself to work harder and dream bigger. The technology they were developing was no longer just a tool for accessibility, it was evolving into a platform that could transform how humans interact with machines, how learning happened, how potential was unlocked. Every day, Maya saw her prototype morph into something breathtaking. She incorporated adaptive algorithms that personalized learning experiences in real time, used neural networks to interpret user feedback, and designed interfaces that were intuitive and compassionate. The process was grueling, and mistakes were costly. During one long night, a critical system error erased weeks of progress. Maya felt tears sting her eyes, the weight of exhaustion pressing down. Elon simply said, "Failure is just feedback. Reset and keep moving." That phrase became her mantra. As the months passed, the project gained momentum. They secured funding from major investors who finally recognized the potential Maya had always seen. Media outlets began to take notice, profiling her as the woman behind the breakthrough technology. But the spotlight was double-edged. Public scrutiny was intense. The same voices that once doubted her intelligence now questioned her authenticity. Critics argued that her success was a product of Elon's backing, not her own genius. Online forums buzzed with debate, some praising her as a trailblazer, others dismissing her as a lucky beneficiary of privilege. The pressure was relentless. Maya's personal life suffered. Long hours at the lab meant missed calls with her mother, strained conversations with Jason, and less time with Sarah, whose support remained a steady anchor. There were moments when Maya questioned if she was losing herself in the whirlwind. Yet, amidst the chaos, moments of beauty emerged. She watched as users of the technology shared stories of newfound confidence, improved learning, and empowerment. Messages flooded in from parents thanking her for creating something that made a real difference in their children's lives. These stories fueled her determination. One day, while preparing for a major product launch, Maya faced the biggest test yet. During a live demonstration streamed globally, the system encountered unexpected glitches, causing the interface to freeze and the audience to gasp. Maya felt panic rise but remembered Elon's advice, own the moment, even when it breaks. Taking a deep breath, she calmly explained the issue, turned it into a teaching moment about the challenges of innovation, and demonstrated backup features. The audience responded with applause. That event solidified her reputation as not only a brilliant inventor but a resilient leader. Through this journey, Maya discovered something profound about herself. Intelligence wasn't a fixed number or a static trait, it was a dynamic, evolving force fueled by curiosity, persistence, and heart. She realized that the harsh judgments she had endured stemmed from society's narrow definitions, which she was determined to expand. As her technology rolled out to schools, hospitals, and communities, Maya's influence grew. She began speaking at conferences, advocating for a more inclusive understanding of intelligence and potential. Her story inspired countless others who had felt overlooked or underestimated. But the journey wasn't without sacrifice. Maya faced criticism not only from strangers but sometimes from within her own circle. Jason's skepticism lingered, and Karen worried about the toll the relentless pace was taking on her daughter's health. Maya struggled to balance ambition with self-care, learning the hard way that sustainability was key to lasting success. Yet, every hardship reinforced her commitment. She knew the road ahead would be long, but she was no longer alone. Elon's mentorship, Sarah's friendship, and the community she was building gave her strength. Together, they were reshaping the future. As Maya stood in front of a packed auditorium at a major tech summit, ready to unveil the next phase of her innovation, she felt a sense of peace and power. The journey from the girl who was laughed at for her IQ to a visionary leader had been tumultuous, filled with pain and triumph. But the lessons were clear: never let others define your worth, embrace failure as a step toward success, and let passion be your guide. The future was hers to create. And she was just getting started. The moment Maya had worked toward for years was finally here, yet it arrived with a swirl of emotions she hadn't fully anticipated. The launch of her technology was set to be a global event, streamed live to millions, a chance to show the world not just what she had built, but what she believed in, that intelligence was vast and varied, that everyone deserved a chance to shine. As she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights felt both thrilling and blinding. Her heart pounded, memories flooding her mind, the laughter in fourth grade, the betrayals, the long nights alone. Now, all eyes were on her. She began her presentation with a steady voice, describing the journey that led her here, the setbacks and the breakthroughs, the doubts and the unwavering hope. She shared stories from users whose lives had been transformed, their voices a testament to the power of empathy and innovation. The technology she unveiled wasn't just a device, it was a lifeline for those who had felt invisible or misunderstood. The audience was captivated, but as the demonstration began, a sudden technical glitch threatened to unravel everything. Screens flickered, the interface froze, and panic rose in Maya's chest. In that split second, she felt the old fear clawing back, the fear of failure, of being exposed as not good enough. But then she remembered Elon's words, the countless nights spent rebuilding, the stories of resilience from those she helped. She smiled through the moment, taking control of the narrative. Innovation isn't perfect, she said with calm conviction. It's a journey. And every glitch is a step closer to something better. The crowd responded with applause, their support washing over her like a wave. Behind the scenes, however, the emotional stakes were even higher. Maya received a call from her mother, whose voice trembled with pride and tears. Karen reminded Maya that her worth wasn't tied to any single moment or score. "You're more than they ever saw," she said softly. "You've made all of us believe." But the emotional climax wasn't just about success, it was about confronting the scars left by years of doubt and pain. At a private moment later that evening, Maya faced Jason, who had flown in for the event. The tension between them was thick. Jason admitted his struggles to understand Maya's journey, his fears that her path was too hard. Maya, in turn, shared her loneliness and the battles fought silently inside her. Their conversation cracked open old wounds but also opened a door to healing. They realized that their love for each other had been buried under years of misunderstanding. Forgiveness was slow but genuine. Maya's emotional climax wasn't just professional triumph, it was a deeply personal breakthrough, learning that success meant little without connection and acceptance. As days passed, Maya reflected on the whirlwind of the launch and its aftermath. She felt a profound shift within herself. The need for external validation faded, replaced by a steadier confidence rooted in self-acceptance. She understood now that intelligence wasn't a label to be earned but a landscape to be explored. The climax-hope-climax cycle she had lived was now a rhythm of resilience. The technology continued to improve, gaining traction worldwide. Schools adopted it to support diverse learners, hospitals used it for patient care, and individuals found new paths to empowerment. Maya's voice became a beacon for those who had been sidelined by rigid systems. At a conference, she spoke about her journey and the importance of redefining intelligence to include creativity, empathy, and perseverance. The crowd was moved, many sharing their own stories of feeling underestimated. Maya's story inspired a movement, a call to embrace difference as a source of strength rather than a weakness. Yet, even as she celebrated this transformation, Maya knew the work was far from over. New challenges loomed. Scaling the technology, navigating corporate pressures, and balancing the demands of fame and personal life. But she faced them with a new mindset. She had learned that setbacks were inevitable, but how she responded made all the difference. The emotional climax of her journey was a turning point, a moment when vulnerability met strength, and pain was transformed into purpose. Maya's story was no longer just about overcoming odds, it was about creating a future where everyone's potential could be realized. And in that future, she was determined to lead with heart, courage, and relentless hope. The days following the global launch brought Maya a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years, like the eye of a storm after a relentless battle. The applause and media attention slowly gave way to quiet moments where she could breathe and reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The technology she had once dreamed about was no longer just a prototype on her kitchen table but a tool being used by thousands around the world. Schools reported improvements in student engagement, hospitals shared stories of patients who responded better to personalized care, and families wrote letters of thanks for the hope her invention had sparked. Maya found herself overwhelmed by the impact of something born from her belief that intelligence was far more than a test score or a certificate. But beyond the success of her creation, the most profound transformation was within herself. She had grown from the uncertain girl who once hid her struggles behind forced smiles into a confident woman who embraced her unique mind and her past mistakes as vital pieces of her story. Conversations with Elon had left a lasting impression, not just about technology but about life itself. He told her, "The future belongs to those who dare to be different, who can see possibility where others see limits." Those words echoed in Maya's mind as she walked through her now much larger apartment, walls lined with awards and photographs of the people her work had touched. Yet, she remained humble, understanding that the journey was never really about fame or accolades but about connection. She reconnected with her mother in ways that deepened their bond, sharing stories of hope and resilience, of nights filled with tears and mornings of determination. Karen's quiet strength had been a foundation Maya didn't always recognize in her youth, but now she cherished every conversation, every word of encouragement. Jason, too, was finding his way back into her life. Their relationship was no longer defined by distance or doubt but by a shared desire to understand and support one another. The healing was ongoing, slow and sometimes painful, but it was real. Maya also made space for Sarah, whose friendship had been her lifeline during the darkest moments. Together, they started a foundation aimed at supporting young inventors from underserved communities, offering mentorship and resources to help others turn their ideas into reality. Maya's story had inspired more than just technological change, it sparked a movement toward inclusivity and empathy in innovation. As she reflected on the past, Maya understood the true meaning of intelligence. It wasn't just about logic or numbers but about resilience, creativity, empathy, and courage. Her own journey had been shaped by failure as much as by success, by loneliness as much as by love. She realized that every setback was an opportunity to learn, every challenge a chance to grow. Her public speeches evolved to include this philosophy, urging audiences to redefine what it meant to be smart and to value diverse ways of thinking. One memorable speech at a national conference went viral, where she said, "Life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. Don't let others' definitions limit you. Your mind is your own universe, vast and full of possibilities." The message resonated far beyond the tech world, touching hearts across generations and backgrounds. Maya's life was no longer driven solely by ambition but by purpose, a desire to build a future where everyone could be seen, heard, and valued for who they truly were. The laughter that had once mocked her intelligence had transformed into applause for her spirit. Yet, Maya remained grounded, aware that the path of innovation and self-discovery was ongoing. New projects beckoned, new challenges awaited, but she faced them with a quiet confidence rooted in the lessons learned. In her quiet moments, she often thought back to that curious question that started it all: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? Maya had faced that darkness, and through it, found not only herself but a community that believed in the power of resilience and love. The story she lived was a testament to the truth that intelligence cannot be measured by a single number or judged by narrow standards. It was an ever-changing journey, one that embraces struggle, hope, and the courage to dream. And as she looked to the future, Maya knew this was only the beginning. After the success of her first major breakthrough, Maya thought she might finally catch her breath, but the tech world is never static, and neither was her journey. The excitement of her launch quickly gave way to new pressures and unexpected obstacles. As her innovation gained popularity, competitors began to emerge, many trying to mimic or surpass her technology. These rivals came armed with bigger budgets, flashy marketing, and teams of seasoned engineers. Maya faced the harsh reality that in the world of tech, success invited not just admiration but fierce competition. Her small startup had to evolve rapidly or risk being swallowed whole. Investors who once praised her vision began pushing for faster returns, wanting to see profits rather than just social impact. Maya grappled with balancing the original mission of her invention, helping people and changing lives, with the demands of scaling a business in a cutthroat industry. She realized that leadership meant more than being a brilliant inventor, it meant managing people, making tough decisions, and sometimes sacrificing ideals to survive. In this new phase, Maya encountered internal conflicts within her own team. Some members were eager to pivot toward commercial products that promised quick money, while others, including Maya herself, wanted to stay true to the social purpose that had sparked the project. Tensions flared in meetings, emails became terse, and morale wavered. Maya struggled to mediate, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. The stress also took a toll on her personally. She found herself working longer hours, neglecting sleep and relationships. The loneliness she had feared before returned in new forms. Sarah remained a steadfast friend, often reminding Maya to take care of herself, but even her support couldn't erase the exhaustion that clouded Maya's mind. Meanwhile, Maya's relationship with Jason continued its rocky path. They wanted to rebuild what had been broken, but old wounds ran deep. Arguments about priorities and values surfaced, with Jason struggling to understand the demands of Maya's rapidly changing world. Maya sometimes questioned whether she could have both the life she dreamed of and the love she longed for. Through it all, Maya clung to the lessons she'd learned about resilience and hope. She refused to let the hardships silence her passion or dim her vision. Instead, she sought new ways to adapt. One breakthrough came when she connected with a diverse advisory board made up of educators, psychologists, and community leaders who reminded her why the technology mattered. Their insights reignited her sense of purpose and helped steer the company toward balancing impact with sustainability. Maya also began to delegate more, learning to trust her team and empower others to lead in their areas of expertise. This shift was difficult but necessary. The transformation wasn't just professional. Maya's confidence deepened, and she grew into a more nuanced leader, one who understood that success required not only intelligence but emotional maturity and empathy. Public appearances became opportunities to share not just her invention but also the complexities of the journey, breaking the myth that success was linear or effortless. Critics still questioned her, sometimes harshly, but Maya responded with honesty and grace, turning criticism into conversation. She embraced vulnerability as a strength, inspiring others to do the same. Maya's story continued to ripple outward. She was invited to speak at universities, tech summits, and community centers, always highlighting the importance of embracing diverse minds and redefining intelligence. These engagements connected her with new allies and advocates, expanding her network beyond the usual Silicon Valley circles. At the same time, Maya explored partnerships with organizations focused on mental health and education, integrating holistic approaches into her technology. These collaborations enriched the project, making it more than just a tool but a platform for empowerment and healing. However, not all challenges were external. Maya wrestled with moments of self-doubt and fear. The pressure to innovate, to stay relevant, sometimes overwhelmed her. She had to confront her own perfectionism and learn that failure wasn't the end but a part of growth. Meditation, therapy, and support groups became vital lifelines. Maya's evolving emotional landscape added depth to her character. She was no longer just a genius inventor but a woman embracing her humanity, with all its flaws and strengths. As the company stabilized and her technology reached more people, Maya's personal life slowly found balance. She and Jason took tentative steps toward rebuilding trust, attending counseling and spending intentional time together. While the past could not be erased, they learned to appreciate the present and hope for the future. The chapter of Maya's life that had once seemed like a constant battle now included moments of joy, laughter, and connection. Looking back, Maya realized that every conflict, every challenge, had been a stepping stone to a fuller version of herself. The sharp edges of doubt and fear had softened, replaced by a resilient core fueled by purpose and love. The journey was far from over, but Maya was no longer alone or uncertain. She had built a community, a mission, and most importantly, a belief in the power of difference. The laughter that once tried to define her was now a distant echo, overshadowed by the voices of those she inspired and the impact she created. Maya's story was a testament to the messy, beautiful process of growth, a reminder that true intelligence includes the courage to face conflict, the grace to adapt, and the heart to lead with compassion. With renewed strength and clarity, Maya prepared to face the next chapter of her life and work, knowing that the road ahead, though unpredictable, held infinite possibility. Maya's world had expanded far beyond what she had imagined in those early days of doubt and struggle, but with expansion came new and unexpected challenges that tested her resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. After months of consolidating her company's position in the market and refining the technology, Maya began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. Some of the early excitement started to fade, replaced by skepticism and fatigue. Investors pressed harder for rapid results, demanding quarterly profits that seemed at odds with Maya's vision of creating lasting social impact. The media, once captivated by her underdog story, now scrutinized every decision, looking for flaws or controversy. The weight of public expectation pressed heavily on Maya's shoulders. Behind closed doors, the company faced internal tensions that threatened to unravel the progress they had made. Team members debated fiercely over the direction of the product, some pushing to add flashy features aimed at broad appeal, while others advocated for deeper integration with educational and therapeutic communities. Maya found herself mediating battles she never expected to face, balancing passion against pragmatism, ideals against financial realities. The sleepless nights returned, haunted by doubts and the relentless pace of change. But this time, Maya approached the pressure with a new mindset born from years of experience. She reminded herself that no journey of meaning was without sacrifice or challenge. She surrounded herself with trusted advisors who could help her navigate the storm and made self-care a non-negotiable priority. Meditation, long walks, and meaningful conversations became her refuge. Amidst the turmoil, a new opportunity emerged that would take Maya's work to a profoundly personal level. She was approached by a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting children with learning disabilities in underserved communities. They proposed a partnership to customize Maya's technology to meet the specific needs of these children, many of whom had been written off by traditional education systems. The request touched Maya deeply. She saw herself reflected in these kids, misunderstood, underestimated, fighting against odds stacked high. The collaboration promised to be a chance to make the technology not just a tool but a lifeline for those who needed it most. The project required intense adaptation and research, drawing Maya and her team into communities far from their usual urban tech hubs. Visiting schools and homes, Maya witnessed firsthand the struggles and the resilience of children and families battling systemic neglect and stigma. She listened to parents' stories of frustration and hope, educators' challenges and dreams. These experiences reshaped her understanding of intelligence and human potential even further. The technology evolved to incorporate more personalized, culturally sensitive features, emphasizing emotional support and empowerment alongside cognitive tools. The partnership sparked renewed energy and purpose within the company. Team members who had felt disillusioned found inspiration in the tangible impact they were making. Maya's leadership style shifted as well, becoming more collaborative and inclusive, valuing diverse perspectives and lived experiences. Yet, the emotional weight of this work was heavy. Maya carried the stories of the children and families with her, their struggles a constant reminder of the stakes involved. There were moments when the pain felt overwhelming, but Maya leaned into the community she had built, her friends, mentors, and even unexpected allies from the tech world who shared her vision. Together, they celebrated small victories, a child who could finally read fluently, a teacher who found new hope in her classroom, a parent who saw their child's potential shine for the first time. These moments fueled Maya's determination to push forward, despite the obstacles. Meanwhile, the public narrative around Maya was evolving too. The media began to highlight the deeper impact of her work, moving beyond the surface story of genius inventor to explore the broader social implications of her technology. Interviews focused on the intersection of innovation and equity, the role of empathy in tech, and the importance of redefining intelligence in a diverse world. Maya found herself at the forefront of a movement advocating for inclusion and understanding. Her speeches, once centered on personal triumph, now embraced collective empowerment and systemic change. The transformation wasn't just professional but deeply personal. Maya's relationship with Jason had weathered many storms, and they now stood on steadier ground. Their love was marked by honesty and respect, a commitment to grow together despite the uncertainties. They planned for a future that balanced ambition with connection, recognizing that neither could thrive without the other. Maya also nurtured her friendship with Sarah, whose unwavering support remained a pillar of strength. Together, they dreamed of expanding their foundation, creating spaces where young innovators from all backgrounds could find mentorship, resources, and community. As Maya looked toward the horizon, she understood that her journey was a mosaic of breakthroughs and setbacks, joy and pain, solitude and connection. She no longer saw intelligence as a simple trait but as a rich, evolving tapestry woven from experiences, emotions, and relationships. Her story, once defined by the cruel laughter of others, had transformed into a symphony of voices rising together to challenge outdated norms and celebrate the infinite ways humans can learn, grow, and thrive. With renewed vision and steadfast heart, Maya prepared to embrace whatever came next, knowing that every twist and turn was part of the extraordinary adventure of life. Maya had grown used to operating in high-stakes environments, but the months that followed her partnership with the nonprofit brought challenges of a different kind. Slower, deeper, and more personal. Her technology had reached into homes and classrooms across the country, giving thousands of children the tools to believe in themselves again, and while the media hailed her as a hero for educational equity, the pressure that came with such responsibility began to shift inside her like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface. She was no longer just an inventor or a CEO, she had become a symbol, and with that came expectations that were hard to live up to. Every misstep was amplified. A single delayed update became a headline. An algorithm tweak that didn't work as expected led to a storm of criticism online. Maya found herself constantly managing fires, both technical and emotional, from concerned parents, overwhelmed staff, and a growing number of critics who claimed she was trying to overcorrect an educational system that didn't want to change. The stress became more isolating than ever. She woke up in the middle of the night worrying about children in distant schools who depended on her tool. She stared at her phone long after midnight, reading articles about the very real disparities her product was trying to address but couldn't fix overnight. And for all her success, the imposter voice in her head returned in hushed whispers, asking if she truly deserved the trust so many had placed in her. In response, she doubled down on the work, pouring herself into code, design, and endless meetings. Sarah watched with quiet concern, often inviting Maya out for coffee or long walks to give her space to breathe, but Maya would shake her head and say, "Not now. Too much to fix." Even Jason, who had come a long way in understanding her purpose, began to express concern that she was burning herself out. "You can't carry the world on your shoulders, Maya," he told her one evening, as she sat surrounded by printouts, data projections, and color-coded planning charts. "You don't have to prove yourself anymore. You already did." Maya didn't answer right away. How could she explain that the proving wasn't about others anymore? It was about something inside her, something that still believed she had to earn her worth every single day. But the breaking point came in the least expected way. She received an email from a small rural school district in Kentucky that had been using her technology. The principal wrote to say that while the software had transformed the way his teachers engaged with students, they had to stop using it. Their funding had been cut, and there was no way to maintain access. The message included a handwritten letter from one of the students, a young girl named Ellie, who wrote, "Miss Maya, your machine helped me feel like I wasn't dumb. It made my brain feel like it could do anything. I don't want to lose it." Maya stared at the letter for a long time, her chest tight with emotion. She had never met Ellie, but she saw herself in those words, the desperation to feel seen, the fragile confidence that a single change could shatter. That night, she cried in a way she hadn't cried in years, not just from exhaustion but from the ache of knowing she couldn't save everyone. And maybe that was the hardest truth of all. The next morning, Maya made a decision. She called an emergency board meeting and proposed a complete restructuring of the company's pricing model. They would introduce a sliding scale based on district income, subsidized by a new fund she would personally contribute to and raise money for. Some board members objected immediately, arguing that it would hurt their bottom line, that investors would walk, that the company couldn't sustain such a model. But Maya stood firm. "We didn't build this to be another exclusive tool," she said. "We built it to change lives. If we abandon that now, we're no better than the system we're trying to fix." After a long intense debate, the board narrowly approved the plan. It would be risky, but Maya didn't care. For her, the risk of betraying her values was greater. The fund launched under Ellie's name, and within weeks, it was flooded with support. Teachers donated. Parents contributed. Tech leaders, inspired by Maya's bravery, offered to match funds. The story went viral. And with it, something inside Maya shifted again, less about ambition, more about alignment. She was finally becoming the person she had always hoped to be, not just a brilliant mind, but a brave heart. The pace of life didn't slow down, but Maya moved through it differently now. She set clearer boundaries, delegated with trust, and made space for quiet. She took long walks with Jason, who was now more present than ever. They began talking seriously about starting a family, not in a rush, but with the same thoughtfulness that defined everything else she did. She laughed more with Sarah, whose loyalty remained unshakable. They celebrated small wins, held each other up during setbacks, and shared a vision for the future that was no longer about survival but about impact. Maya also began mentoring young women in tech, especially those who had been told, as she had, that they weren't smart enough. She told them her story not to glorify it, but to make it real, to show that fear, failure, and doubt were not the end of the road but part of the map. And slowly, something beautiful began to happen. Maya's name became synonymous not just with innovation but with integrity. The girl they had laughed at was now teaching the world how to listen, how to learn differently, and how to lead with love. She knew there were still many challenges ahead. Systems don't change overnight, and technology, no matter how good, can't fix everything. But she also knew this: change starts with belief, and belief starts with a single voice daring to say, "You matter. You belong." And for Maya, that was more than enough to keep going. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maya stood in front of the mirror early one morning, the city still dark outside her window, her reflection staring back with quiet certainty. The woman looking back at her was no longer the girl who flinched at every test score, who avoided eye contact in meetings, who doubted her own voice. She was no longer chasing recognition or trying to disprove anyone's judgments. What she carried now was a quiet fire, a purpose not just rooted in invention but in transformation. The success of the Ellie Fund had shifted everything. What started as a scholarship initiative to keep access alive for students like Ellie had evolved into a full foundation dedicated to equity in tech-enabled education. Maya hired a small team of passionate educators, technologists, and social workers who shared her mission. She traveled across states to meet with lawmakers, school boards, and community leaders, advocating for policies that valued diverse intelligences, not just standardized outcomes. Every step she took reminded her of the uphill battle she was still fighting, not with technology, but with deeply ingrained systems that dismissed students who didn't conform to narrow definitions of intelligence. In one meeting with a state superintendent, Maya was told bluntly that while her tool was inspiring, it wouldn't change test scores fast enough to be funded. Maya clenched her fists under the table, then calmly responded, "If all you want is a number, you're not educating. You're measuring. There's a difference." The room went silent. Afterward, one assistant approached her and whispered, "Thank you. No one ever says that out loud in here." These moments mattered. They were sparks in rooms built to stay dark. Meanwhile, the company's internal culture began to mirror the mission more fully. Maya instituted new hiring practices that focused on neurodiverse talent, creating flexible roles for those who thought differently and worked best on their own terms. She brought in mental health professionals to build internal support systems, not just for users of their products, but for the team itself. The result was profound. Creativity soared. Employees who once struggled in rigid roles flourished in adaptive environments. The company's output improved in ways that weren't just faster, they were smarter, more empathetic, more meaningful. Maya often paused to watch it happen, marveling at how far they had come from that cramped apartment and blinking cursor on a blank screen. But with growth came the inevitable pressure from outside forces. A multinational tech giant took notice of Maya's work and offered to acquire her company for an astronomical figure. The deal would make her wealthy beyond imagination, give her a seat on powerful boards, and offer access to global distribution, but it came with conditions. The acquiring company wanted to commercialize the platform for private schools and elite learning institutions first, citing profitability. They promised to circle back to underserved communities once they had recouped their investment. Maya sat with the offer in silence for a full minute, then said, "No." The decision sent shockwaves through the business world. Investors were divided. Some applauded her moral stand, others called her foolish. But Maya knew that saying yes would have sold out everything she'd built. She could not turn her life's mission into a luxury product. That choice made her a target. Anonymous op-eds questioned her leadership. Former colleagues accused her of being unrealistic. The tech media speculated that her refusal to sell was driven by ego, not values. Through it all, Maya stood tall. Elon, still a mentor and occasional collaborator, reached out after the deal fell through and simply texted, "Hard choices define vision. You're playing the long game. Proud of you." It meant more than she let on. The months that followed were challenging. Revenue dipped as investor confidence wavered. Maya had to make difficult cuts and reprioritize projects. But the core remained intact. The foundation continued to grow. More schools joined. More students saw themselves as capable. And slowly, the tide began to turn again. Maya's public image, once bruised by her principled stand, began to rebuild as stories emerged from communities her tool had transformed. A teenage boy in Detroit who had nearly dropped out now wanted to study computer science. A grandmother in New Mexico used the platform to help her dyslexic granddaughter learn to write poems. A school in rural Mississippi saw its first group of special education students pass state literacy standards, not because the test had changed, but because the system finally saw them clearly. These stories were Maya's currency. They weren't measured in stock prices or market shares, but in lives changed. At a national education summit, Maya gave a keynote that silenced a ballroom of hardened policymakers. She didn't show slides or quote statistics. She simply told Ellie's story, and then asked, "What do we gain if we build a future that works only for the few? What do we lose if we keep ignoring the brilliance that lives in places we never thought to look?" There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Maya left that stage knowing something had shifted, not just in others, but in herself. The fear that had once lived in her bones was now gone. She no longer felt like an outsider in rooms of power. She belonged there. She had earned it, not by conforming, but by building something better. And as she looked ahead, Maya began laying the groundwork for something even bigger, a public education lab that would partner with schools across the country to test new models of inclusive learning using adaptive tech, emotional support systems, and holistic education design. Not just a product, but a movement. Her nights were still long. The work was still hard. But her purpose was clear, and the momentum was real. She ended each day by reading one user letter, a reminder of why it all mattered. And every morning, she woke with the same quiet resolve. Not to prove herself, but to build a world where no one ever had to. Because she remembered how it felt to be laughed at, doubted, ignored. And she knew what it meant to be seen. It began with an invitation that arrived quietly in Maya's inbox late on a Sunday evening, just as she was about to shut down her computer after a 14-hour day of back-to-back meetings, code reviews, and a last-minute donor pitch for the Ellie Fund. The subject line was simple: UNESCO Global Education Initiative, invitation to collaborate. At first, she assumed it was a mistake or some kind of mass email sent to a list she happened to be on, but as she read further, she realized it wasn't just real, it was urgent and personal. The director of the initiative had followed her work from afar, watched the transformation of her platform from a prototype in an apartment to a tool of hope across underserved communities, and now they wanted her help to build a global model for inclusive learning. Not a product. A model. One that could be adopted by public education systems in developing countries, customized using local languages and cultural frameworks, and powered by Maya's adaptive tech layered with community-driven insights. They weren't offering money. They were offering reach. Real, lasting impact on a scale she had only dreamed about. Maya sat back, the glow of her laptop reflecting in her eyes as the possibilities washed over her like a tide. This was more than a new chapter, it was a new horizon. She said yes the next morning without hesitation. The project took her beyond America's borders for the first time since the start of her journey. She traveled to Kenya, Indonesia, Peru, and parts of Eastern Europe, often with a translator and a backpack full of notebooks, sitting in classrooms built from shipping containers, meeting with parents under trees, and watching children solve logic puzzles on old, cracked tablets running her software. The contrast to Silicon Valley's sterile conference rooms was stark, but Maya never felt more at home. Here, the stakes were raw and real. Here, learning meant something beyond a score, it meant survival, independence, voice. In a village outside Nairobi, a boy named Kioni used Maya's interface to communicate for the first time after years of being considered nonverbal. His mother wept when she saw his screen light up with symbols and sounds forming words he had always known but never expressed. Maya cried too. These were not markets. These were lives. She knew now that this was the truest version of her work, intelligence not as currency, but as connection. But taking the platform global came with new challenges. There were technical ones: unstable internet, outdated devices, language translation, and local data security laws that varied from region to region. There were cultural hurdles too. Some communities were skeptical of technology, especially from outsiders, fearing cultural erosion or surveillance. Maya never tried to sell her solution. Instead, she listened. She co-designed with teachers, built modules with local coders, and ensured that every rollout came with training and consent. She made mistakes, of course. In one region, a feature she designed to track learning patterns was seen as intrusive by elders who believed learning should remain oral and relational. Maya apologized. She pulled the feature. She adapted. Over time, trust grew. Governments began to take notice. Educational leaders invited her to share findings. Her team, once a dozen scrappy coders and volunteers, grew into an international coalition of educators, designers, and human rights experts. Yet through it all, Maya never allowed the mission to drift. The platform would never be monetized for the communities it aimed to serve. It would remain open source, community-led, and shaped by the people who used it. The business model back home adjusted accordingly, with the U.S. operations funding the international side through licensing and philanthropic partnerships. Investors who couldn't see the vision left. Others joined who understood that purpose was a kind of capital too. Back in the U.S., Maya's reputation soared again. She was honored at global forums, featured in major documentaries, and written about in essays that dissected the new wave of human-centered technology. But Maya remained grounded, more focused than ever. She refused book deals. Declined most speaking engagements. She spent her time in the field or with her team, building, listening, improving. Her relationship with Jason, now her husband, had matured into a quiet, enduring partnership. They traveled together when they could, Jason often volunteering in local schools while Maya worked. They talked of adopting, of building a family not just from biology, but from shared purpose. Sarah remained her compass, now the executive director of the Ellie Foundation, overseeing thousands of microgrants that supported young innovators from rural towns to inner cities. The two women often stayed up late, wine in hand, poring over letters from recipients, marveling at how far things had come since those uncertain nights in their 20s. But even with all the momentum, Maya never stopped feeling the weight of responsibility. She knew every decision had consequences, every oversight could ripple across lives. One night in India, after a long day training rural teachers, she lay awake in her hotel bed, haunted by the memory of a school in Alabama that had once relied on her system and had since shut down due to state budget cuts. She couldn't save them all. That truth still hurt. But she had learned to let that ache live beside the joy. Because for every loss, there was a win. For every no, a yes. And sometimes, she thought, that balance was the most human thing of all. At the end of the year, Maya returned to her hometown for the first time in a long while. Her old high school had invited her to speak at their graduation. She walked the same hallways where once she had been teased, where teachers had dismissed her, where she had learned to hide her brilliance just to survive. And now, she stood on the stage, looking out at faces full of nervous hope, and she told them the truth. That intelligence doesn't always look like grades or sound like confidence. That sometimes it feels like silence, like struggle, like resistance. But it's there. It's always there. Waiting to be seen. The auditorium fell silent when she finished. Then someone in the back stood and clapped. Then another. Then the room erupted. Later that evening, a girl approached Maya with tears in her eyes and said, "They used to laugh at me too. But now I know I'm not alone." Maya smiled, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "No," she said gently. "You're not." As she walked back to her car, the night cool and quiet around her, Maya felt a stillness inside, a rare, sacred calm that told her she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The seasons changed but the mission remained, and as winter melted into spring, Maya found herself standing under a canopy of jacaranda trees in southern Brazil, their purple blossoms drifting down like quiet snowfall as children gathered around her in a small open-air classroom. She watched as a teacher guided the students through one of the modules her team had localized just weeks before, the interface translated into Portuguese, the images adapted to reflect the local environment, and the experience reshaped to match the rhythm and flow of how these children learned. They were laughing, curious, engaged, not because the platform was flashy, but because it met them where they were and let them move at their own pace. One little girl tapped through a story sequencing exercise, narrating softly as she went, and when she reached the end, she turned to Maya with a beaming smile that didn't need translation. It was the kind of smile Maya had come to live for. These were the moments that anchored her, that reminded her what it was all for. But this visit wasn't just about celebration. Brazil was the latest testbed for a new AI-powered learning companion Maya's team had been developing for over a year, an emotionally adaptive system that could detect frustration, curiosity, or disengagement based on user behavior and adjust the learning path accordingly, not just through difficulty scaling but through tone, timing, and encouragement. The prototype had already shown promise in controlled environments, but Maya insisted it needed to be trialed in real-world, low-resource settings. What good was an empathetic AI if it couldn't work offline, in unstable conditions, with children who had never held a tablet before? Her engineers pushed back, citing bandwidth and latency concerns, but Maya held firm. "Build for the margins," she said. "If it works here, it'll work anywhere." In Brazil, the results surprised even her. Children bonded with the system quickly, naming their AI guides, asking questions, treating them like trusted friends. One boy named his Luz Light. Another girl, Maria, who had refused to participate in group activities before the program arrived, now used her companion to write stories, her teacher in tears as she shared how Maria had come out of her shell for the first time. But as always, success brought scrutiny. A visiting journalist covering global education reform published a glowing piece about Maya's work, then followed it days later with an op-ed questioning the ethics of emotional AI in children's learning. The critique spread fast, sparking debates across academic and tech circles. Was it manipulation or support? Empowerment or surveillance? Maya didn't dismiss the concerns. In fact, she welcomed them. She convened a roundtable with ethicists, psychologists, child development experts, and, most importantly, the communities using the technology. She aired every critique in public forums, published transparency reports, and issued a challenge: help us build something better. Don't just point out the flaws, join us. That openness became a defining feature of her leadership. She was never the loudest in the room, but always the one most willing to listen, learn, and adapt. Her humility drew unlikely allies. Former critics who offered to consult, competitors who asked to collaborate, and policymakers who invited her to help shape national education standards. But even as the world grew louder around her, Maya's internal life became quieter, more intentional. She had learned the hard way that impact was not a sprint, nor even a marathon, it was a lifetime walk, and she had to pace herself. She built routines into her travel, carving out early mornings for reflection, long afternoons for writing, and nights for connecting with Jason, even across time zones. They developed a ritual: every Sunday, no matter where she was, they'd each write one handwritten letter and send a photo of it to the other. The letters weren't always profound. Sometimes they were just grocery lists or ramblings about a book or a memory, but they were real, tangible pieces of each other's lives, anchoring them to something beyond the mission. Sarah continued to be her mirror, challenging her when she drifted too far from the core, always with love and clarity. Don't let your own myth box you in, she warned over coffee one day in New York. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to be human. That's what makes this matter. Maya nodded. She knew Sarah was right. The accolades continued: Time 100, honorary doctorates, a documentary shortlist for an Oscar, but Maya had stopped needing them. She appreciated them, but no longer chased them. Her validation came from quieter places now: a mother's email, a child's drawing, a schoolyard filled with joy. She kept one such drawing on her desk, a crayon sketch of herself as a superhero with a cape made of books. Underneath, in block letters, a child had written, "Maya makes the hard stuff feel soft." That was her legacy. Not code or companies, but the feeling she left in others, the belief that they were capable, seen, and valued. And yet, beneath the fulfillment, there were shadows. Maya began to receive subtle threats from fringe groups who believed her work was part of a global agenda to control education. Conspiracy theories bloomed on obscure message boards, accusing her of mind control, data harvesting, even trying to replace parents with AI. At first, she brushed them off. But when an anonymous email arrived containing personal details, her travel itineraries, Jason's workplace, Sarah's home address, she couldn't ignore it. Security was tightened. A digital security team was brought in. Law enforcement opened an investigation. Maya kept working, but the emotional toll was deep. The idea that her work, rooted in compassion, could be so misunderstood, twisted into fear and hate, it shook her. For the first time in years, she considered stepping back. But then she remembered Ellie's letter. Maria's smile. Keone's first words. And she knew she couldn't stop. Fear would not write the ending of her story. Instead, Maya did what she had always done: she turned the pain into purpose. She launched a digital literacy campaign to teach communities how to discern truth from misinformation, how to question with integrity, and how to protect their digital lives. It wasn't a direct part of her company's mission, but she saw now that empowerment had many forms. She gave lectures on ethical AI and participated in global summits on digital rights, often urging developers to think not just about what their tech could do, but who it could hurt if misused. In doing so, she began to reclaim the narrative. Not by fighting lies with louder noise, but by flooding the space with truth, empathy, and light. By the end of the year, Maya was invited to give a TED Talk. She almost declined. She had always preferred substance over spectacle. But Jason and Sarah convinced her this was different. This wasn't about her, it was about the millions who might need to hear that intelligence is not a measure, but a mosaic. And so, she stood on the red circle in Vancouver, her voice steady, her heart full, and told the story of a girl once laughed at for her IQ, who built a future not with revenge, but with grace. She ended with a simple line that echoed through the crowd like a bell: it's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about building rooms where everyone is allowed to be smart in their own way. The standing ovation lasted nearly 4 minutes. Backstage, she wept, not from pride, but from release. For the first time, she felt the full arc of her journey not as a burden to carry, but as a story to offer. A torch, passed forward. Maya returned home after the TED Talk to find the world both quieter and heavier. She had delivered her message, poured her soul into every word, and now the applause was over, the lights dimmed, and the inbox was full again. The weeks that followed were slower than usual, not because there was less to do, but because Maya felt a subtle shift inside her, a weariness she couldn't explain, a fog that didn't lift even with rest. She had always been able to recharge through work, but now it drained her, even the parts she used to love. Meetings blurred. Emails went unread. The fire was still there, somewhere deep, but muffled. Jason noticed first. He didn't push. He made tea, adjusted the lighting in their apartment, offered more long walks, fewer words. Sarah checked in daily, sensing the difference in Maya's voice. "You've been running a marathon uphill for years," she said softly. "It's okay to sit down." But Maya couldn't. Or didn't know how. She had built so much from the ashes of who she used to be, created an entire movement, helped millions. What did it mean to pause when the world was still calling? Yet the truth became harder to ignore when her doctor, during a routine checkup, looked at her for a long moment after reviewing her vitals and said, "Maya, you're on the edge of burnout. Serious burnout. Your body is showing signs of adrenal fatigue. You need rest. Real rest. Not a weekend. Months. Or you'll crash." Maya nodded, numb. She had expected to hear something was wrong, but not this. She left the clinic in a daze, the streets unfamiliar in their clarity. Everything looked too sharp, too fast, like life had kept spinning while her soul had slowed down. That night, she sat on the balcony with Jason and finally said it out loud. "I don't know who I am when I'm not building something." He didn't answer right away. Then he placed a hand over hers and said, "You're the same person. You just need to learn how to be still." The next day, Maya informed her board she would be stepping back for 6 months. She appointed Sarah as interim CEO, to no one's surprise or objection. The team rallied around the decision. People didn't just respect Maya, they loved her. And they wanted her whole, not hollow. She booked a cabin in the Pacific Northwest, no Wi-Fi, no calendar, no noise. Just books, trees, water, and the permission to unravel. The first few days were agonizing. Maya found herself reaching for her phone instinctively, crafting responses in her head to imaginary fires, worrying she was being forgotten. She paced. She journaled in half-sentences. She couldn't even cry. But slowly, silence began to feel less like absence and more like invitation. She read poetry. She listened to the rain. She cooked simple meals and walked barefoot in the grass. She painted poorly, wrote nonsense, stared at the stars, and let herself grieve, not just the recent years, but the childhood that had taught her to outrun everything. And in the stillness, memories returned. Not grand moments, but small ones, the feel of her grandmother's quilt, the sound of chalk on a blackboard, the time she built a Lego city that no one praised but she loved anyway. These became pieces of herself she had forgotten, hidden behind ambition and responsibility. She let them resurface. She let herself remember who she was before the world demanded she prove her worth. Halfway through her sabbatical, she received a letter forwarded to her cabin by Sarah. It was from Ellie. Not the little girl, but now a teenager. The handwriting was stronger, the tone more confident. Dear Miss Maya, it read, I wanted you to know I'm applying to college next year. I want to study psychology and education. I want to build things like you did. I never forgot what you made for us. And I never forgot that you believed in me before I believed in myself. Maya read it 3 times, tears sliding down her cheeks. It was all the confirmation she had ever needed. Not fame. Not headlines. Just this, one life changed enough to keep the fire burning. She returned from the mountains in early spring, a little heavier from rest, her face softer, eyes clearer. Her first day back at headquarters felt like walking into a new world. The team had thrived in her absence. Sarah had led with grace. Innovations continued. Partnerships grew. And most importantly, the mission remained intact. It didn't all rest on her shoulders anymore, and maybe it never had. Maya began to restructure her role. She stepped down as CEO permanently, taking on the title of founder and vision steward, a position designed not to lead operations, but to safeguard the soul of the mission. She would guide, teach, and speak, but she would not burn out again. She also began mentoring more deliberately, building an entire mentorship branch within the foundation to connect underrepresented youth with industry leaders who could guide them with the same care Maya had once longed for. She started each session by telling her story, not the highlight reel, but the messy parts. The doubts. The nights alone. The fear. Because what she had learned most in the stillness was this, that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. It is the doorway to it. Maya's influence continued to grow, but it no longer defined her. She turned down TV offers, spoke only at events she felt aligned with, and prioritized time for herself, her family, and the parts of life that didn't need to be shared online. She and Jason adopted a daughter from a foster system in Louisiana, a brilliant 8-year-old who reminded Maya of herself in both brilliance and stubbornness. They named her Alina. The first time Alina saw Maya's name in an article, she asked, "Are you famous?" Maya smiled and said, "A little." Then added, "But that's not the best part about me." Alina nodded, as if she already understood. Maya still traveled, still built, still dreamed, but now with balance. She knew the movement was bigger than her, and that was the point. It would continue without her. It had to. The world she was building was not one where people like her were rare, it was one where they were everywhere, thriving. Not in spite of their differences, but because of them. And every time someone tried to question the worth of a child based on numbers or tests or narrow standards, Maya would smile gently and say, "Let me tell you a story." Maya was standing in the middle of a circular classroom in Seoul, surrounded by educators and student volunteers, when she realized that something fundamental about education itself was shifting, and not just because of her. All around her, children were seated not in neat rows, but in pods, working on projects that merged science, language, and art. A girl coded a musical poem in Python. A boy built a simulation of how a tree absorbs water using recycled plastic tubing and food dye. It was organized chaos, alive and buzzing with the kind of curiosity that couldn't be forced into a curriculum. And every student was using a version of Maya's adaptive interface, not as the centerpiece of learning, but as the quiet thread running beneath it, personalized and responsive, guiding them at their pace, adjusting tone, nudging gently when they hesitated. It was the future, and it was happening. This pilot program, the result of years of collaboration between her foundation, the South Korean Education Ministry, and local NGOs, had taken root faster than expected. What began as a 3-school experiment had expanded into 20 schools across the country. The secret wasn't just the tech. It was the trust, the way Maya's team had trained teachers not to fear being replaced, but to become facilitators of discovery. In meetings, she often said, "We're not automating learning. We're amplifying it. Teachers are still the heart." And they believed her, because she meant it. At one such meeting, an older teacher with decades in the profession stood and said, "I used to feel useless around all this new technology. Now I feel like I'm part of something bigger than I ever imagined." Maya thanked him quietly, humbled. But the impact in Korea was only the beginning. In the last year alone, her foundation had launched pilots in Morocco, Finland, and Colombia, each adapted to local needs, each co-designed with communities, not imposed upon them. It wasn't just global education anymore. It was a global conversation. And yet, with this momentum came another challenge. Governments now wanted to mandate her platform for national curricula, turning an opt-in tool into a required part of the education system. The implications were enormous. Funding would skyrocket. Reach would expand. But so would control. Maya sat with her legal team in Geneva reviewing draft contracts and memorandums of understanding. "If we agree to this," one advisor warned, "we lose some freedom. They could request changes. Data access. Rewrites that don't align with your vision." It was the kind of dilemma she never thought she'd face. Scaling the dream but risking its soul. That night, she called Sarah. "If we say yes, we could help millions. But what if they twist it?" Sarah replied, "Then we write a different contract. One that protects the users. One that holds them accountable too. You don't have to compromise. You just have to be specific." And so they were. Maya's lawyers drafted a global usage license, an entirely new legal framework that allowed governments to implement the software while requiring third-party ethics audits, annual community input sessions, and full user transparency. No backdoors. No silent data sharing. No silent edits. When the framework was published, other tech nonprofits followed suit. It became known informally as the Maya Protocol. Meanwhile, back home, a U.S. senator invited Maya to testify before Congress during a hearing on the future of AI in public education. Cameras flashed as she walked into the chamber, wearing a simple navy suit, hair pulled back, not there to impress but to speak truth. When asked how her technology could address inequality, she answered calmly, "AI can't solve inequality. But it can reveal where it hides. It can open doors for students who've been locked out. But only if we use it responsibly." A senator challenged her, saying, "Aren't you afraid of creating dependence on machines?" Maya replied, "I'm more afraid of a system that creates dependence on test scores and leaves no room for wonder." The room was silent. One representative later approached her and whispered, "My daughter's dyslexic. Your platform gave her a voice." Maya nodded, no words necessary. Outside of government and policy, her work was beginning to reshape corporate responsibility too. A coalition of major tech companies reached out, asking Maya to advise them on inclusive design. She agreed under one condition: they had to fund scholarships, apprenticeships, and open-source educational tools for underserved communities. No PR fluff. Real investment. To her surprise, they said yes. Soon, kids from Mississippi to Manila were participating in programs previously out of reach, building apps, creating solutions for their neighborhoods, dreaming bigger than their zip codes ever allowed. One girl, aged 15, used the tools provided to build a Braille-to-Voice app for her blind grandmother. Another group of teens developed a mental health journaling app, inspired by the emotional companion feature in Maya's system. It was happening. The ripple effect she had always hoped for. But amid all this progress, a shadow loomed. A for-profit competitor emerged, fast-growing and backed by aggressive capital. They mimicked aspects of Maya's design, stripped it of its ethics guardrails, and began rolling it out in private schools under a subscription model. Parents were promised results. Kids were promised perfection. Maya watched in dismay as reports surfaced of students being profiled by hidden data metrics, their emotional patterns sold for targeted ads. She debated whether to respond publicly or stay focused on her mission. In the end, she chose action. She convened a global summit of educators, technologists, students, and parents to draft the Declaration for Human-Centered Learning, a non-binding but influential document that outlined principles for ethical educational technology, transparency, inclusivity, respect for privacy, co-design, and above all, humanity. The declaration went viral. Schools began using it as a benchmark. Investors began asking startups if they were Maya compliant. It wasn't law. But it was influence. And sometimes, that mattered more. Maya didn't want to destroy her competitors. She wanted to raise the standard so high that anyone who cut corners would be left behind by their own users. That's how change happened, not by force, but by example. In the midst of all this, Maya received a video message from a class of students in New Zealand who had won a national innovation challenge using her tools. In the video, they held up a banner that read, "Our dreams are learning to speak." Maya watched it alone in her office, heart full, the sky outside turning pink. She didn't feel famous or powerful. She felt grateful. And deeply, deeply human. That night, Jason cooked dinner and Alina set the table. Afterward, they danced in the living room to old records. For once, Maya didn't check her phone, didn't scan emails, didn't think about the next launch. She just danced. Because after years of building, proving, pushing, and sacrificing, she had finally learned something essential, that sometimes, changing the world begins with learning how to live in it fully. Maya never expected to return to Washington, D.C. so soon after her congressional testimony, but when the President's Advisory Council on Emerging Education Technologies reached out with a formal invitation to serve as a lead advisor, she knew this wasn't something she could ignore. Not because of the title or the political optics, but because of the moment, because the country stood on the verge of a sweeping national reform, and for the first time in history, adaptive learning technology might actually shape public education in a way that reached every child, not just the privileged few. She said yes on one condition: she wouldn't play politics. She'd offer solutions, not spin. And if they didn't want the truth, they could rescind the offer. They didn't. And so, Maya found herself walking the halls of power again, only this time not as a case study or a cautionary tale, but as a builder of the blueprint. The first weeks were intense. Late-night meetings, briefings, and constant negotiations with policy analysts, education leaders, tech representatives, and union leaders. Everyone had a stake. Everyone had an opinion. Maya listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, she was deliberate. "We are not designing for ease," she told the group during one tense strategy session. "We're designing for equity. That means it will be messy. It will take time. And it will be worth it." Her clarity cut through the noise. Slowly, agendas aligned. Within 6 months, she had helped craft a national pilot program that integrated her adaptive learning framework into 50 school districts, rural, urban, and tribal. Each district would receive localized support, teacher training, and full autonomy to adjust tools for their community's needs. It wasn't a takeover. It was a partnership. And it came with a clause: the right for students and parents to opt out at any time. Consent remained sacred. As the rollout began, Maya traveled from state to state, often quietly, sometimes without media, visiting classrooms, sitting with families, and conducting fireside Q&As with skeptical parents. In one small town in West Virginia, a mother stood during a session and said, "They said you were trying to turn our kids into robots. But my son comes home now and actually wants to read. So, I just wanted to say thank you." Maya smiled and said, "I'm not here to replace teachers or parents. I'm here to give your kids tools that see them as whole people. That's all." That sincerity continued to win people over. But there were still landmines. In Texas, a local school board tried to force the addition of ideological content into the AI prompts. Maya refused. "This system will never be a mouthpiece for any political doctrine," she said, terminating the agreement despite the political fallout. Some headlines praised her. Others condemned her. She stopped reading them. Meanwhile, in private, her life continued to evolve. Alina had started middle school, growing into her intellect with a confidence that sometimes startled Maya. She would ask questions like, "Why do we learn history if adults just keep repeating it?" Or, "Do you think AIs will ever dream?" Jason remained Maya's sanctuary, steady, warm, intuitive. He could sense when she was slipping back into overwork and would intercept her with humor or a spontaneous road trip. They had found a rhythm now, a shared language of glances, silences, and quiet joy. Maya's mother had grown ill that year. Early signs of dementia. At first, it was just forgotten appointments, misplaced names. But soon, it became more than that. There were entire conversations that vanished, familiar streets that turned foreign. Maya flew to visit her every other week, sitting at her bedside, reading to her from their old photo albums, playing classical piano pieces through her phone that her mother used to hum while cooking. One afternoon, her mother looked at her and said, "You remind me of my daughter. She was so smart. People didn't understand her. But I knew she was meant for something special." Maya couldn't speak. Just nodded, tears tracing silently down her face. That night, she stayed until her mother fell asleep, then sat on the porch of the assisted living home and stared up at the stars. All the technology in the world, all the breakthroughs, and she still couldn't stop time. She still couldn't hold on to everything that mattered. That realization didn't harden her. It softened her. Made her more present. She began speaking more openly about her past during interviews and panels, not just her triumphs, but the fear, the shame, the loneliness that shaped her. She wanted others to know that brilliance wasn't always loud, that pain didn't cancel potential. She often ended her talks with the same words, "You're not broken. You're becoming." Those words began showing up as tattoos. As murals. As hashtags. A movement had formed around her, but Maya refused to let it become a brand. She didn't license her name. She didn't sell merchandise. "This isn't about me," she reminded her team. "This is about building a world that doesn't need someone like me to fight this hard just to be heard." On the first anniversary of the National Pilot Program, Maya stood in front of the Capitol again, this time not testifying but celebrating. Representatives from every district involved in the pilot shared results, reading scores up, absenteeism down, engagement through the roof. But the most powerful moment came from a student named Emilio, age 14, who spoke at the podium in front of thousands. "Before this program," he said, "I thought I was dumb. I thought I couldn't learn like everyone else. Now I know I just learned differently. And that's okay. Actually, it's amazing." Maya stood off to the side, hands clasped, eyes shining. This was the payoff. Not stock value. Not awards. Just one voice, finding itself. Later that night, she walked alone through the city, remembering her first visit all those years ago when she'd been nothing but a name on a list, barely surviving, still haunted by the sound of people laughing at her in classrooms and online. She wasn't angry anymore. She was free. As she passed the reflecting pool, her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. It was a screenshot of a job application. Ellie had just been hired by the foundation to lead their new youth innovation lab. Maya smiled, heart full. The girl who had once been lost was now building ladders for others. A full circle, quietly complete. As she walked on, Maya whispered into the soft Washington night, "Thank you. For all of it. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts." The morning of the Global Learning Futures Summit in Nairobi began with the sound of rain. Maya stood barefoot on the balcony of her hotel suite, a thin linen robe clinging to her shoulders as she watched the storm roll over the distant savannah. Thunder in the distance, soft and steady, like a drumbeat for something ancient. She'd arrived the night before, jet-lagged but focused, knowing this summit wasn't just another speaking engagement, it was the convergence of everything she had worked for. Over 50 nations were gathering to discuss the future of education, technology, and global equity, and Maya had been chosen to deliver the keynote address. Not because she lobbied for it, but because they insisted. Because after more than a decade, people had stopped asking, "Who is Maya Patel?" and had started asking, "What would Maya do?" Still, she felt the weight of it. Not pressure, exactly, but presence. The understanding that her words could shape policy, shift ideologies, crack open the closed minds of bureaucrats who still clung to outdated systems out of habit or fear. She showered, dressed in a simple emerald green tunic with embroidery stitched by a women's cooperative her foundation had funded in India, and made her way downstairs. Cameras flashed as she entered the conference hall, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the people, students from Tanzania and Thailand, administrators from Canada and Chile, programmers from Jordan and Nepal. All gathered not for spectacle, but for solutions. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't take the stage immediately. She walked through the crowd, microphone in hand, smiling as she passed tables, making eye contact. "We've come a long way," she began. "Not just in terms of distance or development, but in the courage to imagine something better. When I started this work, I was told I was too quiet. Too emotional. Too inexperienced. They laughed at my IQ. They questioned my credentials. They said I didn't belong. But I'm standing here now because I never stopped asking one question: what if we built systems that believed in people before they proved themselves?" The room was still. Even the translators paused, caught in her cadence. "Technology," she continued, "is not the answer. You are. We are. Tech is a tool. It can amplify love or reinforce fear. It can build bridges or deepen divides. What matters is how we use it, and more importantly, who we use it for." She spoke for 40 minutes without notes, weaving stories of children from refugee camps who were now entrepreneurs, of former dropouts who had returned to school through mobile learning hubs, of communities once dismissed as too poor to help, who now designed their own curricula using open-source platforms. When she finished, the applause rose like a wave and didn't stop. Delegates stood. Cameras shook. Some cried. She didn't bask in it. She simply nodded and returned to her seat. The work wasn't done. It never would be. Later that evening, as panels unfolded and task forces formed, Maya was approached by a delegation from a consortium of African nations. They wanted to implement her entire framework, curriculum, AI tools, training infrastructure, across a unified regional system. It was unprecedented. If successful, it could reshape an entire continent's access to equitable learning. But it came with a caveat: they wanted Maya not just as an advisor, but as an architect of the rollout. For 3 years. On the ground. Not flying in and out. Embedded. Leading. Maya was stunned. She had never committed to a project that long since founding her platform. She excused herself and stepped outside, walking into the soft Kenyan night, the air warm and earthy. Jason would understand. He always did. But Alina? Maya thought of her daughter's drawings taped to the kitchen wall, her spot at the dinner table, her voice singing in the shower. Could she do this and still be the mother she promised she'd be? She called Jason. Told him everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then his voice: "Let's move. All of us. We'll make it work." Maya leaned against a tree, overcome. "Are you sure?" He laughed. "Maya, the world is rearranging itself around you. We'd rather be with you in the middle of that than safe on the sidelines." The decision was made. Within 6 months, the Patels relocated to Nairobi. Maya opened a regional office, not in a gleaming tower but in a shared workspace near a public school. She hired locally, mentored young technologists, sat in dusty classrooms taking notes from kids. The work was immense: language barriers, infrastructure gaps, political resistance, but she never lost sight of the core: connection. One project became her obsession: School in a Box, a solar-powered, offline-compatible learning kit designed for remote villages. It included a rugged tablet, charging hub, projector, and multilingual content packs. She didn't just fund it. She field-tested it, spending nights in highland communities where children hiked for miles just to watch a single lesson projected on a wall. She saw teenagers teaching their younger siblings, grandparents watching alongside with wonder, whole families relearning the alphabet together. The impact was seismic. Within a year, dropout rates in test regions dropped by 40%, while literacy rates jumped across the board. The UN recognized the model as a global best practice. Maya declined the award ceremony, opting instead to attend a student-run showcase in Uganda, where a boy named Isaac stood up and said, "I want to be like you. Not because you're famous. Because you listen." She smiled, knelt down, and said, "Then you're already like me." Her days were full. Her nights were sacred. Family dinners, storytelling under mosquito nets, laughter echoing through their home. Alina adjusted surprisingly well, making friends, learning Swahili, writing essays about empathy and coding robots that danced to traditional music. She was thriving. Maya documented everything, not for PR, but for memory. She knew this chapter was rare. Demanding. Beautiful. Fragile. After 2 years, an international think tank asked her to draft a global manifesto on the future of education. She titled it simply, "Learning is Belonging." In it, she argued that the next generation of innovation wouldn't come from gifted programs or elite universities, but from unlocking the genius hidden in overlooked places. She ended with a sentence that would soon be quoted around the world: "When we teach a child that their mind matters, we don't just educate them, we set them free." The paper was translated into 29 languages and used by ministries, schools, and nonprofits. But for Maya, it was just one more step. She wasn't looking for legacy. She was building continuity. Planting seeds. One evening, as she stood at the edge of Lake Naivasha watching flamingos skim the water, Jason joined her. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She nodded. "All the time. And I think, maybe it's time to step back. Not away. Just, sideways. Make space." "For who?" he asked. "For the ones coming after me. The ones we believed in before they believed in themselves." She took his hand, the sky turning violet, and whispered, "That's how we keep this alive." By the 3rd year in Nairobi, Maya had become more than a thought leader, she had become a quiet revolution. Her name was spoken in schoolyards and presidential offices with equal weight. In dusty villages and digital conference halls, students and teachers alike quoted her words, adapted her frameworks, and, most importantly, began believing that learning wasn't a privilege, it was a birthright. Yet with that influence came another kind of tension. Maya felt it in her chest every morning, a gravity pulling her in multiple directions. One email from a tribal school in northern Canada asking for help adapting School in a Box to the Inuktitut language. Another message from a refugee camp in Lebanon requesting trauma-sensitive modules. A request from a South American coalition to co-develop a justice-based curriculum that addressed colonial histories. Each one was urgent. Each one mattered. And there was only one Maya. Her team had grown into hundreds, then thousands, but people still wanted her. Her voice, her attention, her touch. That used to feel like purpose. Now it felt like weight. One morning, while finalizing plans for a mobile learning caravan across the Masai Mara, Maya received a message marked urgent. Her mother, now living in an assisted memory facility in California, had suffered a severe fall. Internal bleeding. Cognitive function had declined rapidly. Maya didn't hesitate. Within hours, she was on a flight with Jason and Alina, her head resting against the window, tears streaking silently as the plane pierced the sky. Landing back in the US was disorienting. It had changed. Or she had. The pace felt unfamiliar, the conversations sharper, the buildings taller but somehow more hollow. Her mother was barely responsive. For 3 weeks, Maya sat by her side, telling her stories from Kenya, whispering memories into the sterile room like incense. On the 4th night, her mother opened her eyes briefly, stared directly into Maya's, and said just 2 words, "Keep going." Then she fell back into sleep, and within days, she was gone. The funeral was small, per her mother's request. No fanfare. Just a simple gathering in the garden of a care home, where Maya spoke softly about the woman who had taught her resilience without words, strength without noise. She didn't cry during the eulogy. She wept alone later, curled beside Jason, the ache too old and too deep for anyone else to reach. After the burial, she returned to Kenya, but something had shifted. Not in the mission, but in Maya herself. Her hands trembled during morning meetings. She forgot names she once knew cold. A tremor in her voice made Sarah, visiting from San Francisco, gently intervene. "Maya," she said one afternoon as they walked near a wildlife preserve, "you need to stop carrying all of this. You keep pushing forward like grief is a glitch. But it's not. It's a process. You taught me that." Maya stopped, heart pounding. "I'm afraid that if I stop now, the momentum dies." Sarah shook her head. "If it all depends on you, then we failed. But we haven't. We've built something stronger than that. It's okay to pass the torch." Those words lingered. Over the following weeks, Maya began asking herself the question she always avoided: what if my role now is to leave the stage, not stand on it? So she began the work of stepping back. Quietly. Intentionally. She named regional leaders in every continent where the foundation worked, all of whom had risen from within the program. Former students. Former critics. Former skeptics turned believers. She created a rotating leadership council and a youth board with actual authority, not token input. She made the foundation open source, removing paywalls and IP restrictions so that the platform could live beyond her influence, even beyond her philosophy. And most boldly, she wrote a personal letter to every team member titled, "I am not the brand." In it, she explained that the next era of learning shouldn't revolve around a singular visionary. It should rise from collective wisdom. She ended with, "If you need a hero, look in the mirror. If you need permission, you already have it. Build without me. Build better than me." The letter went viral inside the education world. Some mourned her departure as a mistake. Others called it visionary. Maya didn't care. She just wanted to breathe. To be Maya, not Dr. Patel, not the mind architect, not the woman who changed everything. Just Maya. So she and her family moved again, this time to a quiet coastal village in Portugal, where Alina enrolled in a bilingual school, Jason wrote short stories in the mornings, and Maya, for the first time in decades, learned how to be still without guilt. She swam in the mornings, barefoot on the sand. She baked. She sketched landscapes in a journal she never showed anyone. She still received invitations every week, keynotes, book deals, think tanks, but turned almost all of them down. When she did speak, it was by surprise, at intimate gatherings. No cameras. No agendas. Just people. One such moment came during a local teacher training in Lisbon. Maya had been invited simply as a guest observer, but during a break, a young teacher asked her, "How do I reach the student who won't speak? The one who just stares through the window like he's somewhere else?" Maya thought for a moment, then said, "You don't reach him. You sit beside him. You tell him it's okay to stare. You ask what he sees out there. And eventually, he'll invite you in. But only if you don't rush." The teacher scribbled it down like scripture. Word spread that she'd spoken. But Maya disappeared before anyone could ask for more. She didn't want to be a ghost haunting her own legacy. She wanted to be a whisper in the wind, a quiet ripple, a lesson passed from voice to voice without attribution. That's how she knew the movement would live. Not because people remembered her, but because they no longer needed to. One evening, as she and Jason sat watching Alina play guitar by candlelight, Maya leaned back and whispered, "I think we're finally home." Jason nodded. "You built the world you needed, Maya. And now it's building itself." She didn't answer. Just listened. To the music. To the silence. To the life that, for once, didn't need fixing. Just feeling. Maya's days in Portugal began to follow a rhythm that had nothing to do with productivity charts or speaking tours. She woke with the sun, not an alarm. Brewed strong coffee in a clay pot, the kind locals used. Walked along the coast with Jason or alone, sometimes for miles, letting her thoughts unravel like seafoam. When she sat down to write, it wasn't code or speeches. It was poetry. Or reflections. Sometimes just lists of things that made her feel: dew on lemon trees, the sound of children laughing in 3 languages, the way grief sometimes visited quietly on Tuesday mornings and then left just as quietly by dusk. She didn't think of it as retirement. She thought of it as repurposing. The world no longer needed her to design systems. It needed her to witness what those systems had become. And what they were becoming without her. Occasionally, news would reach her. A new public school in Jakarta had integrated the emotional literacy tool she once prototyped in her garage. A former refugee student from Syria had just launched a peer tutoring app in 20 countries using her open-source backend. A blind teen in Chicago had written a best-selling memoir about her learning journey, crediting Maya Mode for showing her that learning could feel like a song, not a test. Maya would read these headlines, sometimes tear up, sometimes laugh, but always nod. Quietly. Gratefully. And then return to her garden. She had learned that growth didn't always look like expansion. Sometimes it looked like depth. Alina, now 15, was becoming her own kind of force. She had published an op-ed in a European youth journal calling for student-led evaluations of AI tools in classrooms. It was sharp, passionate, a little reckless, and entirely her. Maya read it with trembling pride. "She's you," Jason said one night, pouring wine on the terrace. "No," Maya replied. "She's who I wish I could have been at her age." Unapologetically herself. The village respected Maya's privacy, but word inevitably spread. "That's her," neighbors would whisper as she passed the bakery. But they left her alone. Except when they didn't, when a teenage girl knocked on her door asking if she could interview Maya for a school project, or when the elderly bookseller invited her to speak at a community gathering in the plaza. Maya always said yes, but never promoted it. One such evening, she stood under the stars in the plaza, lanterns swaying, as dozens gathered to hear her speak, not because she was famous, but because they trusted her. "People think I taught machines to learn," she said softly. "But really, I was trying to teach people to remember what learning feels like. Curiosity. Vulnerability. Joy. Not just results." A fisherman raised his hand and asked, "How do you know when your work is done?" She paused. Then answered, "When the next generation builds something you couldn't imagine, without asking your permission." The crowd murmured in approval. But Maya wasn't trying to impress them. She was trying to release something. To let go. A month later, she received a letter. Handwritten. Mailed through 6 countries before arriving. It was from Ellie, the young woman who had once almost taken her life, who had once lived in Maya's home. Now in her 20s, Ellie had launched a foundation of her own, aimed at creating transitional schools for youth coming out of the foster care and juvenile systems. She had raised $12 million. But the letter didn't mention the money. It talked about pain. And forgiveness. And how she had finally forgiven herself. "You once told me I wasn't broken," Ellie wrote. "You were wrong. I was. But I wasn't unfixable. Thank you for sitting in the dark with me. That's what saved me. Maya held the letter to her chest and wept. Not because of sadness, but because of release. The ripples were working. The seeds were growing. And she didn't have to tend them all anymore. That fall, she accepted one final speaking invitation, at a small, invitation-only event called the Quiet Leaders Retreat, hosted in a former monastery in the French countryside. Attendees included teachers, caregivers, social workers, and unknown heroes. No press. No social media. Just a circle of people who had chosen service over spotlight. Maya spoke not from a stage, but from a wooden stool in the center of the group. We live in a world that rewards noise, she began. But change, real change, is usually quiet. It happens when a teacher stays after school, unpaid. When a counselor calls a kid's home just to say they matter. When someone holds space for pain without trying to fix it. She paused, looking around. I wasn't a genius. I was just stubborn. I kept asking why systems hurt people and what it would take to make them stop. Then I built things so that others wouldn't have to ask that question alone. When she finished, no one clapped. They just sat with it. One woman reached out and touched Maya's knee gently. You gave us permission to care loudly, she said. That night, Maya sat by the fireplace, a blanket over her knees, and thought about how far she had come. From the bullied girl whose silence was mistaken for stupidity. To the woman whose silence had become power. Not in volume, but in depth. In clarity. In truth. A week later, she returned to Portugal, back to her quiet life. She taught a small workshop at the local school on storytelling for social change. She baked bread with an elderly neighbor who only spoke Portuguese and communicated through smiles and gestures. She planted a lemon tree in the backyard. Jason carved a bench under it. One afternoon, as the tree began to bloom, Maya sat beneath it with a notebook. She didn't write plans. She wrote gratitude. To her mother. To the girls who once laughed at her. To Elon Musk, whose unlikely intervention gave her just enough runway to prove herself. To Sarah. To Jason. To Alina. To herself. She ended the entry with 4 words, now, I can rest. The seasons shifted softly in Portugal, and Maya found herself drawn more and more into quiet moments of reflection. The lemon tree in her garden blossomed each spring, a living testament to resilience and renewal, much like her own life. She often sat beneath its branches, notebook in hand, but these days the words came less as plans and more as meditations, on loss, on love, on the strange alchemy of failure and triumph. One evening, Jason found her staring out over the ocean, the sky painted with hues of lavender and gold. What are you thinking about? He asked, sitting beside her on the bench beneath the tree. Maya smiled, a little sadly. All of it. The girl who was told she wasn't smart enough, the years of proving them wrong, the people who lifted me up, and those who didn't. I wonder what it all means in the end. Jason took her hand. It means you changed the world. Not just by what you built, but by who you became. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Sometimes I worry that I'll be forgotten. That the story will get simplified or twisted. That people will only remember the Elon Musk story or the viral speeches, not the years of quiet work or the setbacks no one saw. Legacy is never what we imagine, Jason said. It's a conversation between the past and future. And you're part of that conversation forever. That night, Maya dreamed of the schoolyard from her childhood. The place where she'd first felt invisible. But in her dream, the kids gathered around her, their faces bright with curiosity and kindness. A voice she didn't recognize but somehow knew whispered, "You belong." She woke with tears and hope tangled together. In the months that followed, Maya was invited to write a memoir, not the usual celebrity memoir, but a reflective book on empathy, intelligence, and the future of learning. She hesitated, then agreed, wanting to leave a record that wasn't about accolades but about the messy, beautiful process of becoming. As she wrote, she revisited old journals, letters, and recordings. She laughed at the stubbornness of her younger self. She cried at the rawness of moments she had long buried. The memoir became a mosaic of stories, some painful, some joyful, all true. She wrote about Ellie's darkness and light, about Alina's fierce independence, about the moment Elon Musk's unexpected support shifted her trajectory. But she also wrote about the silence, the loneliness, the moments when she thought she had nothing left to give. The book was published quietly, with a modest launch in Lisbon. It wasn't a bestseller overnight, but it found its way into classrooms, libraries, and the hands of young women and men who saw themselves in Maya's story. Reviews called it a testament to the power of vulnerability and a guide for anyone who's ever felt underestimated. Through all this, Maya remained rooted in her daily life. She taught local children how to read, volunteered at a community center for refugees, and continued to nurture the relationships that mattered most. One spring afternoon, a letter arrived from a university in Texas. They wanted to establish a scholarship in her name, for students from underrepresented communities pursuing STEM and education fields. Maya accepted, seeing it as another way to pass the torch. At the awards ceremony 6 months later, she spoke to a crowd of bright-eyed students and educators. "When I was young, people laughed at my IQ. But I learned that intelligence isn't a number. It's courage. It's kindness. It's the willingness to ask questions no one else dares to ask. And it's the grace to listen when the answers come from unexpected places." As she left the stage, a young woman approached, eyes shining. "You inspired me to finish college," she said. "I'm starting a non-profit to support kids like me." Maya hugged her. Then the work lives on. The world kept turning, and Maya's story became one among many threads in the tapestry of change. She often thought back to the moment Elon Musk stepped in, not because it was the start of everything, but because it was proof that sometimes, the universe conspires in the most unexpected ways. In a quiet moment alone, she whispered to the sky, "Thank you." And the wind carried her words across oceans and mountains, to every child learning in the dark, every teacher who stayed late, every heart brave enough to believe in more. As the sun set behind the lemon tree, Maya closed her eyes, knowing that the story was never hers alone. It belonged to all who dared to dream, to rise, and to keep moving forward. The morning Maya turned 60, she awoke before dawn. The village was still asleep, wrapped in the gentle hush of pre-dawn light. Outside, the lemon tree, now taller than the roofline, swayed softly in the breeze. She sat up slowly, her joints stiff but her heart calm. There were no grand plans for celebration. That was intentional. She had never needed balloons or banners. What she valued now was presence, the quiet kind of presence that required no explanation, just space to breathe and exist fully in the moment. Downstairs, Jason had left a folded note on the kitchen table next to a single sunflower in a recycled glass jar. "You are the sunlight the world needed. And still needs. Love, always." She smiled, touched the petals gently, then made her way to the beach barefoot, like she had so many times before. The sea greeted her like an old friend, steadfast, eternal. She waded into the water just to her ankles, the chill reminding her she was still here. Still changing. Still alive. Later that day, Alina arrived home from university in Geneva, unannounced. She walked into the kitchen mid-afternoon with a suitcase and a grin, holding a gift wrapped in cloth. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" Maya pulled her into a tight hug. "I hoped." They sat outside in the garden, sipping lemon tea beneath the tree that had watched them both grow. "So," Maya said after a while. "What's next for you?" Alina leaned back. "We're launching the first AI-human collaboration council at school. Real power sharing between students and the tech. No more black box decisions. I might defer a semester and intern at the Nairobi hub, too." Maya's eyes shimmered, both proud and in awe. "You're building a new model." Alina nodded. "Just standing on your shoulders." "No," Maya said softly. "You're walking beside me now. Maybe even ahead." That evening, the three of them shared a quiet dinner: grilled vegetables, crusty bread, and Jason's famous lentil soup. They lit candles, not for ceremony, but for warmth. The laughter that filled the house was easy, earned, full of the kind of joy that only comes after long years of struggle, healing, and truth. As the night wore on, Maya found herself alone again under the stars. She thought about all that had come and gone. The girl who once hid in corners, misjudged and dismissed. The long arc from invisibility to impact. And all the unexpected hands that reached out along the way, some to hurt, many to heal. She thought of her mother. Of Sarah. Of Ellie. Of the anonymous donors, the relentless critics, the quiet students who never spoke in class but whose eyes held galaxies. She didn't feel nostalgic, exactly. Just full. Full of stories, of people, of moments that stitched together to form something far bigger than one lifetime. A few weeks later, Maya received an invitation she didn't expect. The Nobel Committee had shortlisted her for the Peace Prize. The nomination cited her unparalleled contributions to global educational equity and emotional intelligence through technological innovation and human connection. She stared at the letter for a long time, then set it down and returned to pruning her lemon tree. The truth was, she didn't need the prize. She didn't need any more recognition. Her peace came from different things now: a note from a teacher in rural India saying, "We used your methods, and our students started smiling again." Or an email from a former teen coder in Bolivia who had just finished her PhD, closing with, "You never met me, but your work made me believe I could be more." Those were her laurels. And they didn't sit on shelves, they bloomed in real lives. Still, she flew to Oslo that winter with Jason and Alina. Not because she craved validation, but because she wanted to remind the world that peace was not a moment, it was a method. In her acceptance speech, delivered in a calm, steady voice before heads of state and activists from every corner of the globe, she began with a story. "When I was 12, she said, I failed a standardized test. My IQ was deemed below average. People laughed. Teachers gave up on me. And for a while, I gave up on myself. But what they didn't understand is that intelligence has many languages. And I hadn't found mine yet." She paused. The silence in the grand hall was complete. It wasn't a genius who changed my life. It was people who saw me. Who listened. Who believed. And so I dedicated my life not to becoming the smartest person in the room, but to building rooms where no one felt small. She looked out at the audience, her voice steady. True peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of dignity. In classrooms. In communities. In every conversation where someone is finally told, "You matter." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. But Maya didn't linger on stage. She bowed slightly and stepped down, disappearing behind the curtain like someone exiting a room she had cleaned for others to enter. After the ceremony, in a quiet moment backstage, a young man from Senegal approached her with tears in his eyes. "My mother made me memorize your quote when I was 7, he said. "Learning is belonging. It changed my life." Maya smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then pass it on." Back home, the lemon tree bore fruit early that spring. Maya harvested the bright yellow orbs with her hands, washed them carefully, and made jars of marmalade with Alina, laughing at how bad their first batch turned out. She wrote letters again, not for publication, just for love. One to Jason, thanking him for seeing her before the world ever did. One to Alina, telling her never to dim her fire for anyone's comfort. And one to her younger self, folded and slipped inside the pages of her original coding journal. It read simply, "You are not broken. You are building. On her final birthday in Portugal, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had become family, Maya lit a single candle, closed her eyes, and made a wish, not for more, but for continuation. For every spark she lit to become a torch in someone else's hand. When the candle flickered out, no one knew what she'd wished for. But they didn't have to. Because the world was already glowing. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?